folks. Welcome back to Change My Mind. My first episode in several months. I believe the last time I was here I was talking about the potential of the New York Giants football season and how we had a chance to make the playoffs and, well, disaster struck. Not quite the result I expected. Now the Giants are in the news for another reason. Yesterday, a report came out that former Dolphins head coach Brian Flores was suing not only the NFL, but the Denver Broncos, the Giants, and 5 other NFL teams for discrimination and racism in the hiring process for their head coach. And my reaction, I was not surprised whatsoever. In fact, when the news first broke a few weeks ago that Flores was being fired from his job as the Dolphins head coach, I knew that there was going to be some racial elements to this, because a coach as talented as Brian Flores, who has such a knack for leading young men on the football field, does not just get fired for no reason. And as it turns out, one of the main reasons for Flores being fired was that he was refusing to accept checks worth up to $100,000 to lose football games. And it was because of this that he was fired. Now, this is an unfortunate trend in the NFL that I don't want to see repeated. Because not just Brian Flores, but now former Browns head coach Hugh Jackson also saying that white owners and white general managers have been offering head coaches money to lose games on purpose. I mean, not only is this disgraceful to the game of football and the integrity of the sport, but it comes off as these white men in power forcing these black head coaches to take the fall and take the blame for losing seasons. Because when the Browns went 0-16 and then 1-15 with under Hugh Jackson, who did the media immediately point to and demand got fired? Hugh Jackson himself, the coach. No one pointed at the Browns general manager. Nobody pointed at the Browns ownership. It was the black head coach. Now, Brian Flores had a different reaction. Flores was dealt a very bad hand. He was given one of the worst rosters in the NFL. He was coaching under one of the worst, cheapest front offices in American sports, the Miami Dolphins. And he managed to turn that team from one of the worst teams in football, picking at the top of the draft every year, into a borderline playoff team. And that's as impressive of an accomplishment a coach can have just in general. Just this season alone, Miami started 1-8. 1-8. They started on a 7-game losing streak after week 3. And they ended with a winning record. That's coaching. That's over the course of a season, one man being able to lead his team to a successful run in the season. And that coach was prominently fired. Does anybody honestly think if a white coach went from 1-8 to 9-8 that they would have been fired? Because I most certainly do not. So how do the Giants play into this? Because the Giants are, in fact, my favorite team. Well, shockingly, the Giants had a terrible season, and they fired their head coach, Joe Judge, a move that I was, very behind. I did not think Joe Judge was the right man for the job, especially after the season he just had. And we needed a new coach. So a lot of options on the table. And after we hired our general manager, Joe Shane, it was clear to everyone that the Giants' coaching option was probably going to be one of Brian Daboll, the offensive coordinator from the Buffalo Bills, or Brian Flores, the man who was the head coach for the Dolphins and is now suing the NFL for their actions. So all is good and well. The Giants interviewed both candidates and eventually decided on Brian Daboll to be the new head coach. Doesn't seem like it violated any rules. seems pretty clean to me until Brian Flores yesterday releases text messages that he received from Bill Belichick, who, mind you, used to work for the Giants, so he has connections to the front office, congratulating Flores on the head coaching job. What Belichick didn't know was he was texting Flores. He was trying to text Brian Daboll, congratulating Daboll on the head coaching job. These text messages were sent several days before Flores interviewed in New York. Why is that significant? Because it means Flores was never given a fair shot. It means that the Giants violated the Rooney Rule, which states that each NFL team must interview a minority candidate before hiring a new head coach. And it sure seems to me like the Giants offered Brian Daboll the job before they met those requirements. So the Giants are under fire right now. But I don't know to what extent this criticism should go, because it looks to me like we violated the Rooney Rule, and whatever punishment seems fit from the NFL and from the Players Association and the Owners Association should be implemented. Where I kind of step away is when people suggest that this Giants coaching decision was made and influenced by race. I do not believe that the New York Giants hired Brian Daboll because he was a white man and Brian Flores was black. I do not believe that's the case. When we fired Joe Judge, John Mara personally reached out to Brian Flores and said he was excited to interview Flores and bring him in as a potential candidate. It wasn't until we hired Joe Shane from Buffalo as our general manager that Brian Daboll became the favorite. And I think that the Giants recently this season have been leaning towards letting their general manager do his own work. And I think that when Shane came in and was very confident in Brian Daboll and the relationship that they have, and Joe Shane wanted Brian Daboll as a head coach, the Maras were not going to turn them away. They still did their due diligence with Brian Flores, but I believe that Brian Daboll was hired because of his relationship with Joe Shane and because of his offensive background rather than his race. Now, I still think Brian Flores should have been given a fair chance because he's one of the most talented coaches in the NFL. But I do not believe that he was rejected from the Giants job because of race. Now, I do not believe that's the case with several other teams. It seems in the NFL that every offseason, a quarter of the league is looking for a new head coach. This season, 8 of the 32 teams fired their head coaches. They're looking for new ones. 8 of the 32. Several hirings so far, all of them white men. And I was baffled because if you don't follow my Twitter, go ahead. It's JackWin912. But I tweeted out my predictions, and I had 3 or 4 black coaches being hired. And as these results came in, as these new hirings were being declared, I was more and more surprised. And if it wasn't obvious before, it's obvious now, should be to everybody, that the NFL and the owners of these 32 teams do not trust black coaches to lead their organization. And I don't want to say for whatever reason, because it's obviously a race thing, but these white owners want to hire people who look like them. And if it means bringing in an underqualified candidate, so be it. I don't understand. If you look at the NBA is 80% black, and they have 14 out of 30 black head coaches. The NFL is 70% black. There is one African-American coach. One, Mike Tomlin. And I truly believe in my heart of hearts, Mike Tomlin, in his 15-year head coaching career, never had a losing season. I truly believe that if this upcoming season the Steelers have a losing record, Tomlin's gone. Because that's just the way things are in the NFL. So let's talk specifically. Because it's hard to just say, oh yeah, there should be black head coaches in the NFL without saying where they should be and who they should be replacing. So let's just look at this specific offseason. Jacksonville Jaguars. They are still in the process of hiring a head coach, so I don't know where that's going to go. But it looks to me like it is probably going to be a white coach based off of their finalists. And I was surprised that my pre-offseason pick, Byron Leftwich, the offensive coordinator for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, an African-American man, was not even in the final, was not a finalist. He wasn't given a second interview. If you're at Jacksonville, you have a rookie quarterback or a second year who needs a lot of development after he was screwed up last season. Who better than the offensive coordinator who just worked with Tom Brady, who just led the number one offense in the NFL, and who has experience both as a head coach and as an offensive guru? Naturally, that's not who they're going with. The Las Vegas Raiders. This season, their coach at the beginning of the year was John Gruden. And if you want to talk about racism and leadership, he's the guy you talk about. Because after his email scandal, where there were racist emails leaked and racist text messages leaked, they let John Gruden go, and they brought in Rick Piazza, former special teams coordinator, African-American. A lot of people assumed the season was over for Las Vegas. If you lose your head coach in the middle of the season, it has never in the history of the NFL been done before where you can lose your head coach midway through the year and still make the playoffs. That was the case until Rick Piazza did it. He was not the head coach in the offseason. He did not have time to work with these guys, and he was thrown right into the fire. Hey, Rich, go coach this team. See what you can do with us. And he led them to the playoffs. Could you imagine what someone with the head coaching talent as Rich Piazza could do with an offseason, with the locker room behind him? Because believe me, those players loved Rich Piazza. You've already got Derek Carr. You've already got Josh Jacobs and Darren Waller talking about how much Rich Piazza did for their locker room and how much he did for that football team. Yet, when it came time to hire a new head coach this offseason, Rich was dumped and Josh McDaniels was brought in. Josh McDaniels, the white offensive coordinator from the Patriots, who has a losing record when given the opportunity as a head coach in Denver, which was, once again, a total disaster. He was not qualified to be a head coach. So I don't know what a few years off could have done for him that would have made him more qualified than the guy who just brought you to the playoffs. So clearly looks like another example of race issues in Las Vegas. The Houston Texans. I was fairly confident that when the Houston Texans fired David Culley, an African-American coach, made the team, which should have been a dumpster fire this season, look half decent. That's what David Culley did for this organization this year. He was fired. I was sure that the only reason you fire a guy like that is to hire someone as qualified as Brian Flores. And this situation is more unfortunate than race-based because I'm fairly certain that I was right about that and that Brian Flores was about to be offered the Houston Texans coaching job before he made the law. He had a final interview with Houston this upcoming weekend. And Flores, after releasing the lawsuit, it's looking like he's not going to be able to be hired as the coach because he's going to have a lot of external things he has to deal with. So that's unfortunate for Houston. And they're going to end up with 40-year-old former high school coach Josh McCown instead of a qualified black candidate like either Byron Leftwich, who I mentioned earlier, or anybody else. One more, the Minnesota Vikings. And this is news that broke an hour ago. They were expected to hire Jim Harbaugh, who I'm completely fine with. He's a white coach, but he's qualified. He's been to a Super Bowl. He's been coaching at a high level for many years. That's my dog. He's been coaching at a high level for many years, and he would have been a fine candidate. Except just now, Jim Harbaugh announces that he's going back to Michigan. So he's not eligible for a head coaching job in the NFL. Who is up next on the Minnesota Vikings list for finalists? Why? It's none other than Giants defensive coordinator Patrick Graham. He's an African-American assistant coach. He has shown the ability to lead a group of men, and he is a very smart football mind. He's a genius when it comes to the defensive side. Yet all of a sudden, for who knows what reason, Patrick Graham is leapt by Kevin O'Connell. I couldn't tell you who that is. He has no experience as a head coach. He has very little experience as a coordinator. Yet he has just jumped Patrick Graham. I don't want to say because he's a white man, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was the reason. So again, I don't believe that the Giants hired Brian Daboll because he was white. I believe they hired Brian Daboll because of his connection to Joe Schoen. And I believe that if we had hired a different general manager, Brian Flores might be our head coach right now. But that's not what happened. I also don't want to sit up here and act like the Giants have no racial issues. The Giants are one of the oldest franchises. We've been around since 1925, and we have 0 black head coaches in our entire history. We had a black general manager for 10 years who's going to be in the Giants Ring of Honor or Hall of Fame, but no head coaches, nobody in leadership, no general managers other than Jerry Reese. So the Giants, no black quarterbacks. We have had one black quarterback in the Giants' history, and it was Geno Smith, who started one game when Eli Manning was benched. That's it. And the Giants, if they're trying to be progressive, which I believe they are, not in terms of – which I believe they're trying to move into the future of the NFL, which I believe they are. But if they really want to be a part of the new movement and they want to get a jump start on hiring African-American staff, then it should come in the front office. But if the Tishes and the Maras are too scared to do that, that just makes them one of the other 32 teams in the NFL.